good to have you with us, and welcome to Arirang News, live from our studio in Seoul. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Our top story this afternoon: after being separated by a bitter history dating back more than 50 years, the U.S. and Cuba say they are beginning to work toward warmer diplomatic and economic ties. For more on this rather surprising and historic deal, here's Park Ji-won.
Wednesday's historic announcement that the United States and Cuba will normalize their long-severed relations was made possible after 18 months of secret talks between the two leaders.
Neither the American nor Cuban people are well served by a rigid policy that's rooted in events that took place before most of us were born. The United States will reestablish an embassy in Havana, and high-ranking officials will visit Cuba. Where we can advance shared interests, we will, on issues like health, migration, counterterrorism, drug trafficking, and disaster response.
This decision by President Obama deserves respect and recognition from our people. I would like to thank and recognize the support of the Vatican, and especially that of Pope Francis, in helping improve the relations between Cuba and the United States.
Bringing an end to more than 50 years of hostility, Cuba released U.S. aid worker Alan Gross on humanitarian grounds after he spent 5 years in a Cuban prison. In return, the U.S. will also release 3 Cuban intelligence agents. World leaders, particularly those from Latin American countries, hailed the news.
I think that the possibility of the end of the blockade gives Cuba the conditions to coexist with the international community, something that is extremely relevant for the Cuban people and for all of Latin America.
I want to point out that this is a key step, a historic step, a brave move that will allow for an important advance in the process of integration for all America.
Experts say the restoration of ties will benefit people in both countries.
It'll be easier for Americans to travel to Cuba. It'll be easier for Americans to send money to Cuba. And it will be much easier for Americans to support the emerging private sector, even with trade and capital infusions. All of that should help a rather weak Cuban economy.
Washington and Havana severed diplomatic relations in 1961 after former Cuban leader Fidel Castro seized power and became the first communist leader of the country in 1959. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, that development has many talking about the economic and political impact it will have in the region. But what many here in South Korea are wondering is whether this will lead to Washington putting more efforts into normalizing ties with another communist state, North Korea. Our Lee Ji-yoon looks into that possibility.
When U.S. President Barack Obama came into office in 2009, he promised a new era of diplomacy with the so-called 3 pariah states: Cuba, Iran, and North Korea. 6 years later, it looks like President Obama has kept his promise for Cuba. Then what about Iran? Washington has tried to move things forward with Iran over its disputed nuclear program. Just last year, President Obama spoke on the phone with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. This was the first direct conversation between leaders of Washington and Tehran in more than 3 decades. So now that leaves North Korea. President Obama admitted that the policy of isolation wasn't working for Cuba. And experts say it's possible that Obama might relax his isolation policy toward North Korea as well, to open up for more dialogue with Pyongyang. In fact, the top U.S. diplomat for East Asia, Daniel Russell, said Tuesday that the Obama administration has never been hesitant about holding direct talks with North Korea. He said Washington is waiting with open arms for dialogue with Pyongyang outside of 6-party nuclear talks. Others say, though, that it's too early to link North Korea with what's happened with Cuba.
Whether this is a new position that the Obama administration is taking in their foreign policy with respect to these kinds of countries is something that we could speculate over, but there's no reason to believe that there's a significant tectonic shift that is occurring here with respect to North Korea.
For the Obama administration, there's also the hurdle of North Korea's humanitarian issues and nuclear program. Experts say in order to see a real change, either the South Korean government will have to dramatically change its North Korea policy, or North Korea will have to change its hostile attitude. Lee-Jun, Arirang News.
And it probably won't happen anytime soon, with Washington reportedly believing that the North Korean leadership was indeed behind the recent cyber attack on Sony Pictures. With the hackers launching serious threats against Sony, the company has decided to cancel the theatrical release of its controversial film, The Interview, altogether. For the latest, here's Shin Se-min.
The U.S. has reportedly concluded that North Korea was behind the cyber attack on Sony Pictures late last month, a breach that spurred a series of events that has now led to the studio canceling its Christmas Day release of the movie, The Interview. A government official with knowledge of the investigation says they found links to the North Korean leadership and that although the attack originated from outside North Korea, the individuals behind the scheme were acting on orders from the regime. The government is expected to formally announce its findings as early as Thursday local time. The same group that claimed responsibility for the security breach, the Guardians of Peace, also threatened a 9/11 style attack on theaters that screened The Interview, a comedy that centers on a CIA plot to assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. That threat forced 5 major theater chains, including AMC, Regal, and Cinemark Cinemas, to scrap plans to show the film. Sony responded by saying that it would not release a film at all in theaters, but made no mention of what it plans to do with the movie. The studio said that while it was deeply disappointed and stood by the right to freedom of expression, it respected and shared the concerns. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
In a move that may have been triggered by harsh international criticism over its dire human rights situation, North Korea has reportedly replaced its deputy envoy to the United Nations. Citing a source at the UN, South Korea's Yonhap News reports that Lee Dong-il was replaced a couple of weeks ago and is now back in the north. The report says Lee's successor is An Myung-hun, who was a counselor at the North Korean mission in Geneva. Now, the new envoy also dealt with U.S. issues at North Korea's foreign ministry and was the top negotiator for the food aid talks with Washington back in 2012. Some speculate that the sudden personnel change comes as North Korea holds Lee responsible for not being able to stop a UN committee from adopting a resolution that calls for the regime to be referred to the International Criminal Court. Now, it's been 3 years since North Korea's young leader Kim Jong-un came into power. One area he has put a lot of emphasis on ever since the early days of his rule was the economic front, especially on attracting foreign investment. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee takes a look at the changes made since.
You see high-rise apartments, taxis, people using mobile phones, and children on rollerblades all on the streets of the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. Now, North Korea has recorded 3 straight years of economic growth, although it is in the 1% range, and experts attribute this to Kim Jong-un's relaxed regulations.
Small companies have been granted autonomy in management, although there are limits to self-sufficiency. Such marketization through 장마당 or black markets allows people to more easily buy materials.
But for a real economic liftoff, North Korea needs to attract foreign capital. For that, 10 more special economic zones were established this year, raising the total number to 24. North Korea claims over 300 foreign firms from countries like Australia and Singapore have invested more than $1.4 billion, although these zones are known to have received just $400 million, with 80% of the money coming from China. North Korea's unilateral manner of doing business is keeping investors away, says a Dutch businessman who leads business-related missions to North Korea.
North Korea is also open for business and for foreign investment, but the foreigners, they are not going on a large scale into North Korea. And this is all politics, I'm afraid.
Experts say as long as Kim Jong-un clings on to the so-called Pyeongjin line, or dual development of nuclear arms and the economy, any effort for change will be futile.
North Korea may become more aggressive in introducing reform measures next year to form a Kim Jong-un-style economy. But there will be limits unless there is progress and dialogue on the nuclear issue, like the resumption of the 6-party talks.
They also note the need for secure legal measures, as the world saw North Korea's commitment problem when it unilaterally closed down the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex for 5 months last year. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Well, here in Korea, prosecutors are looking into the so-called nut rage incident after the Transportation Ministry filed a formal complaint following its own investigation. But the ministry is under fire by some for loosely and unfairly handling the case. Ji Myung-gil tells us more.
The Transportation Ministry has come under fire for its handling of the inspection into the nut rage scandal. On Thursday, the ministry said it would conduct an internal inspection into their questioning of the senior steward who was forced to deboard the Seoul-bound flight early in the month. According to the steward, Park Chang-jin, some of the inspectors were former employees of Korean Air. He says Korean Air executives were also allowed to attend sessions where he was questioned. In an interview with a KBS television on Wednesday, Park said he was first informed by Korean Air that he would be questioned by the Transportation Ministry. He said he was provided instructions by the company on how to answer those questions. Although he refused to make false statements, he claims he was pressured by the airliner to do as he was told. Park also commented on a letter he received from former Vice President of Korean Air, Cho Hyun-ah. While it contained an apology, the senior steward said he felt it was not sincere. With time to reflect on the incident, the Korean media and analysts say the scandal has exposed problems that are deeply rooted in Korea's family-dominated conglomerates. Family members at the firms are often more powerful than senior company executives and have reputations for dictating employee behavior. Cho Hyun-ah, the person that set all of this off, wrapped up a marathon 12-hour session at the prosecutor's office in Seoul early Thursday morning and left the building without saying a word. If she is found to have breached aviation safety laws, Korean Air faces a 3-week-long suspension of operations between New York and Seoul or potential fines of up to $2 million. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
In the U.S., the attention was on whether the U.S. Federal Reserve would change its phrasing, which said it will keep its near-zero interest rate for a, quote, considerable period. The wording did change, but Fed Chair Janet Yellen says the new guideline is consistent with its previous direction. Song Ji-sun has the story.
The Federal Reserve confirmed it plans to raise its key interest rate sometime next year. At the end of a 2-day monetary policy meeting, the U.S. Central Bank said it will be patient when it comes to making a decision on when to increase the rate, a change in wording from keeping the rate for a considerable period. While the phrase hints more flexibility in its timing, Fed Chair Janet Yellen said the new guidance is consistent with its previous direction. The Fed said while the U.S. economy was expanding at a moderate rate, its pace of recovery is much faster than that in the Eurozone or Japan, and strong job creation has pushed unemployment down to a 6-year low of 5.6%. Yellen added officials would feel comfortable raising rates as long as other economic signals stay strong and inflation meet its goal of 2%, but it would not take place before the second quarter of next year.
At some point, it will become appropriate to begin reducing policy accommodation. But based on its current outlook, the committee judges that it can be patient in doing so. In particular, the committee considers it unlikely to begin the normalization process for at least the next couple of meetings.
Following the announcement, the dollar rallied broadly against major currencies on Wednesday, and U.S. stock markets were upbeat after 3 days of losses. Despite the sharp drop in oil prices and the collapse of the Russian ruble in recent months, the Fed statement did not touch on the recent global economic turmoil. Asked whether the Russian crisis could harm the U.S. economy, Yellen said the two countries were too loosely linked to expect any appreciable impact, but that they're keeping an eye on the issue. 송지선, Arirang News.
Seoul Industries, the de facto holding company of Samsung Group, made its market debut today. Stocks in the firm opened at more than $96 a share, double the initial offering price of $48. After fluctuating a bit, though, the share closed at over $100 on Thursday, with Samsung Group chairman Lee Gun-hee still hospitalized after his heart attack, and the fact that the IPO process of Samsung SDS and Seoul Industries has accelerated since. Analysts say today's market debut will further speed up the conglomerate's generational power transfer. Now, yesterday, we reported on Google's top 10 most searched items of 2014, and today we zoom in a little more on what Koreans were most interested in. Here's our Kwon Soo-ah with the rundown from Korea's #1 portal website, Naver.
8 out of 10 Koreans use the web, and around 80% of them use the portal website Naver to do their searches. So what have Koreans been typing into their favorite search engine this year? Ranking first, somewhat ironically, was the country's second biggest portal website, Daum. It was followed by weather and video sharing website YouTube. In fourth came the video game League of Legends. And free domestic banks made it onto the list too, as well as webtoons, which are gaining in popularity along with the rise of smartphone readers. And now let's break it down into some specific categories. The most tragic incident of the year, the sinking of the Seoul ferry, was the most searched about current affairs story of 2014. The person most looked up was figure queen Kim Yeona, who retired this year after the Sochi Olympics. In the movie category, the Disney blockbuster Frozen topped the list, and its popularity expanded into the music sector as well with Let It Go. In sports, it was none other than the biggest sporting event of the year, the Brazil World Cup. Now, weather wasn't just a popular search on the Naver website, but also on its mobile version, as well as on Google Korea. The word saw a notable increase in the week of the college entrance exam in November. What amused netizens was that the most looked up item on Korea's #2 portal site Daum was Naver. And as we saw earlier, it was the same for Naver's most searched items. Kwon Soo-ah, Arirang News.
Quite ironic there. Shifting gears now, South Korea had great support both on the military and humanitarian fronts from its allies and the United Nations during and after the Korean War. Since then, Korea has been returning the favor by greatly expanding its peacekeeping operations around the world. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
This year marks the 50th anniversary since Korea's first overseas deployment. More than 320,000 Korean troops were dispatched to Vietnam, the second largest number behind the United States. 5,000 Korean soldiers were killed and over 12,000 were injured before the country pulled out in the spring of 1973. The after effects of the Vietnam War made Korea think twice before deploying another unit overseas. It wasn't until 20 years later that Korea became a member of the UN peacekeeping forces, increasing its involvement in international efforts to maintain peace and stability. So far, Korea has deployed over 360,000 troops in 17 countries, including Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and East Timor. There are currently some 1,400 Korean men and women in uniform deployed in 15 countries worldwide. Why is Korea so actively involved in peacekeeping operations?
Korea was built by the dedication and sacrifice of many different countries. Now we're a politically and economically respected country, and there are expectations both from inside and from abroad.
There are two types of PKOs that Korea takes part in. There are the UN peacekeeping forces and the multinational forces. Both are mandated by the UN, but the biggest difference between the two is that UN peacekeeping forces are fully sponsored by the UN, while the multinational forces are funded by each participating country.
PKOs are not just military operations. They're about military diplomacy, security, cultural and resource diplomacy. It also forges strong ties with the host country. It's also a give-and-take relationship. By taking part in PKOs, Korea can ask for help when it needs it.
Korea's peacekeeping troops have been welcomed in every place they have been dispatched to in the world. They proudly involve themselves in activities away from their peacekeeping activities, even promoting Korean culture to the local communities they are helping. Kim Han-bin, Arirang News.
When we think of auction items, most of us think of art pieces first, then perhaps jewels. But our Im Yoon-hee has a story today with an auction featuring rare and priceless Korean artifacts. Take a look.
But how do you put a price tag on history? Here, the prize items go to the highest bidder. But these items aren't your run-of-the-mill antiques. Before they hit the auction block, the items are put on exhibition, where each one can be marveled at, from cover to cover. From ancient Korean texts to modern paintings, some artifacts date all the way back to the Joseon dynasty, but all holds priceless value to Korea's history. And regardless of destination, for now it holds a special place where it can catch the eye of spectators and collectors alike.
Collectors will follow the goods, wherever, whenever. So here we're offering 232 different types of works and overall 495 pieces. Together they are worth around 1.5 billion won or 1.4 million US dollars. And because these items are so important to Korea's history, we believe it belongs to the people of Korea.
With so many aged artifacts, some are bound to be historical firsts, such as the first Korean English dictionary, which was compiled during the late 19th and early 20th century by J.S. Gale. And a legendary figure in Korea's history, Choi Seung-hee is considered the first leading Korean modern dancer. She paved the roads for many, and an original copy of the first autobiography is just one amongst the treasures. Artist Elizabeth Keith also captured some of Korea's most beautiful moments in her famous watercolor and water block printed works. Now highly revered, some of her original prints, including the hand-colored, make up a part of this exhibition, showing a detailed glimpse into the everyday lives of Korean families, as well as other inhabitants living in a very peaceful country. Amongst the rare books and drawings are also photos and maps, pieces of a cultural heritage that should belong behind museum doors, such as the Ojung Chaegwon, a series of texts written by Korea's former King Jeongjo, starting at a bid of almost $500,000 US.
In the history of this world, there isn't a single king who's written over 100 books, except King Jeongjo of the Joseon dynasty. He wrote many book series, and amongst them is this series given to his confidant, Yoon Heng-im. From cover to cover, it was made with the best supplies, from the best paper to the best handwriting, and even the very best stamps. You can consider this work a masterpiece of art in itself.
Whether it sells at $3,000 or $300,000, each page, each bound book represents thousands of years of a culture, of a people of Korea. And though it's not your everyday art auction, each item here can be considered a work of art, a one-of-a-kind that has withstood the test of time, and must be preserved for the years to come. Im Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. As you saw earlier in the program, the word weather was one of the most popular searches online here in Korea in 2014, and you can be sure that there are plenty of people doing that today because we're in the middle of a sudden cold snap and temperatures have increased from this morning. However, most regions, including Seoul, are still below 0 degrees. But as you might have noticed, the wind is quite strong and putting the sensory temperature at -17 degrees. Now, some of the upper regions, such as Gangwon province, can expect cold wave warnings and advisories, so make sure to bundle up before heading outside. Meanwhile, a dry weather advisory has also been issued along the east coast of Gangwon province. Now, looking ahead to the snow, clouds are coming our way with snow expected nationwide by tomorrow evening. Now to our readings for today. Seoul will be at -2 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan is a bit higher at 2 and 4 degrees. And to other regions, Jeju Island gets up to 6, while Dokdo hits a bit lower at -1, while Namkang drops way to -6 degrees. Well, that's all for now. Michelle Park, and have a wonderful day.
And that's Arirang News for now. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more updates at 6 p.m. Korea time.